The morning my son told me I wasn't welcome at his daughter's birthday party, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee, the same way I'd made it for 40 years. 2 scoops, dark roast, a little too hot to drink right away. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up without thinking. Hey Dad, heads up, Serena's party is going to be a smaller thing this year. Just immediate family. Hope you understand. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and finished making my coffee. Immediate family. I turned that phrase over in my head for a long time. I was the one who had paid for Serena's first birthday party. I was the one who drove 3 hours to be in the hospital waiting room the night she was born. I was the one who set up a college fund for her the week after she came home from the hospital. $500 a month, every month, without being asked, without expecting a thank you. But I wasn't immediate family. Let me back up. My name is Harold, and I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county, mostly infrastructure, bridges, drainage systems, the kind of work nobody notices until something breaks. I retired early at 62 because my knees weren't what they used to be, and because, honestly, I'd earned it. My wife, Patricia, passed from ovarian cancer 8 years ago. That was the hardest year of my life. We'd been married 33 years, and she was the kind of woman who held everything together without making it look like work. After she died, my son Owen became the center of my world. He was 30 at the time. We'd always been close, or at least I'd believed we were. Owen is a good-looking kid, takes after his mother. He married Brianna 4 years after Patricia died, and at first I was glad for him. She's sharp, well-dressed, comes from a family in Scottsdale with a lot of money and a lot of opinions. Her father, Roger, is a retired contractor who made a small fortune in commercial real estate during the Phoenix boom. Her mother, Susan, is the kind of woman who redecorates her house every other year and expects people to comment on it. From the beginning, Brianna made it clear, politely, always politely, that she had a certain vision for the life she and Owen were going to have. And that vision, over time, seemed to require more and more of my involvement financially, and less of it personally. The first time I really felt it was about 2 years into their marriage. Owen called me on a Tuesday evening, the kind of call where you can tell someone's been coached beforehand. He was too calm, too measured. Dad, Brianna and I have been looking at houses. There's one in Tempe we really love. It's just a little out of our range right now. I asked him how much. We're short about $45,000 for the down payment. I didn't say anything right away. Owen had a good job, project manager for a software company. Brianna worked in marketing. They weren't struggling. They were just reaching for something bigger than they could afford on their own. And I was supposed to bridge the gap. I gave them the $45,000. I want to be honest about that. Nobody twisted my arm. I wrote the check because I loved my son and because I remembered what it felt like to be young and wanting to build something. Patricia would have done the same. What I didn't expect was how quickly it became a pattern. 18 months later, the kitchen needed updating. We got a quote, "Dad, it's about $22,000 to do it right." 8 months after that, Owen's car needed replacing. Then it was Serena's private preschool tuition, which apparently cost more per month than my first mortgage payment. Then a vacation to Italy that Brianna had been planning forever. I didn't pay for all of it, but I paid for enough of it that, when I look back now, I can trace a slow and steady current of money flowing out of my retirement accounts toward a life that wasn't mine. The thing that nobody tells you about being a generous parent is how invisible it makes you over time. Every check I wrote seemed to buy me slightly less, not more. I was present at holidays, but always at their house, never mine. I was invited to dinners, but always when it was convenient for them. When I had my hip replaced 2 years ago, Owen visited once. I was in recovery for 6 weeks. Brianna sent a fruit basket. Still, I told myself it was fine. Owen was busy. They had a child now. Life moves fast when you're in your 30s. It was Brianna's mother, Susan, who finally made me understand what was really happening. I was at Owen's house for Thanksgiving 2 years ago, the last Thanksgiving I spent there, as it turns out. Susan had a little too much wine after dinner, and she made a comment that she clearly thought I wasn't meant to hear. She was talking to her sister at the kitchen table while I was getting my coat from the hall closet nearby. Owen would be perfectly fine if Harold just set up a trust and stepped back, she said. It would be so much cleaner. Harold's heart is in the right place, but he's always just there. Her sister said something I couldn't make out. Susan laughed softly. Brianna handles it well. She's patient. But honestly, the man calls Owen twice a week. Twice. I stood very still in that hallway for a moment. Then I got my coat and said my goodbyes and drove the 40 minutes home. He's always just there. I thought about that sentence for weeks. I thought about it while I was making coffee in the morning, while I was doing laps at the community pool, while I was sitting in my living room surrounded by photographs of people I loved. I thought about all the times I had shown up, to school plays when Owen was a kid, to his college graduation, to his wedding, to the hospital when Serena was born, and I wondered if all that showing up had registered anywhere, or if it had just been quietly subtracted from some invisible account I never knew I was running. I didn't say anything to Owen. I just started paying attention. What I noticed, once I was really paying attention, was that contact with my son had become almost entirely transactional. When Owen called, it was usually because something needed fixing. Financially, logistically, practically. When I called him just to talk, the conversations were short and slightly distracted. He always had something going on. He was always just finishing something up or heading somewhere. The gifts I gave Serena at Christmas were placed with the other presents and rarely mentioned again. I had given her a handmade quilt that had belonged to Patricia. My late wife's mother had made it, and Patricia had kept it folded at the foot of our bed for years. I thought Serena should have it someday. I gave it to her on her third Christmas. I later found out from a photo Brianna posted online that it was being used as a dog bed cover in their laundry room. I didn't say anything about that either. There was a fishing trip I'd been planning for about a year. Not anything elaborate, just a long weekend up in the White Mountains at a cabin I'd rented before. Owen and I used to fish together when he was a teenager. We had a spot on the Salt River we'd go back to every couple of summers. I thought it might be good for us. Just the two of us, no agenda. I'd been talking about it for months, and Owen had said yes, he'd make it work. 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, Brianna's family planned a trip to San Diego for that same weekend. Her parents, her sister, her sister's husband. A big family event, apparently, though nothing I'd heard about before. Owen texted to let me know he couldn't make the fishing trip. Sorry, Dad, something came up with Brianna's family. We'll reschedule here. We never rescheduled. I want to be careful here because I don't want to sound like a man who never made mistakes. I was not a perfect father. I worked long hours when Owen was young. I missed things. When Patricia got sick, I went quiet in a way that probably frightened him. Grief does things to people that take years to understand. I know I wasn't always easy to reach, but I had tried. I had kept trying, long past the point where a less stubborn man would have stopped. I tried with money, and with presence, and with patience. I tried in ways that cost me something real, and I had arrived, somehow, at a place where I was told, through a text message, on a Tuesday morning, that I wasn't immediate family. After I got that text about Serena's birthday party, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I thought about Patricia. She had this way of cutting through complicated things, of saying the true version of a situation in about one sentence. I knew what she would have said about this. She would have said, "Harold, the problem is that you keep expecting gratitude from people who have decided that what you give them is simply what they're owed." She would have been right. I called my attorney that afternoon. His name is Paul, and I've worked with him for about 15 years. Estate planning, property, the usual things a man thinks about when he gets to a certain age. I told him I wanted to review everything. All of it. The college fund for Serena, the informal loan I'd extended to Owen for the house, the small monthly support I'd been quietly sending for the past year. When Owen mentioned things were a little tight, Paul listened, asked a few questions, and then said something I'll remember for the rest of my life. "Harold," he said, "you've been treating all of this like it's family, but they've been treating it like it's income." I let that sit. "So what do you want to do?" he asked. I thought about it for exactly the length of time it took to finish my coffee. "I want to make some changes," I said. The college fund had been set up in a way that gave me discretion over the account until Serena turned 18. I changed the beneficiary. I designated it instead to a scholarship fund at the university, where Patricia had gotten her nursing degree. It would be administered annually to a nursing student with financial need in Patricia's name. I made that change on a Thursday and slept better that night than I had in months. The informal loan, the $45,000 for the house, had never been documented properly. That was my fault. I had given it as a gift with a handshake understanding that Owen would pay it back eventually, on no particular timeline. I had never pressed him about it because I didn't want to make it transactional. Now I understood that it already was transactional. I just hadn't been informed. I drafted a formal letter through Paul's office, documenting the loan, establishing a repayment schedule, and noting that the outstanding balance would be considered a draw against Owen's future inheritance rather than a separate debt. It was not aggressive. It was simply clear. The monthly support I stopped without announcement. I had been transferring $800 a month into a joint account Owen, and I had set up years ago for family emergencies. I closed my access and transferred the remaining balance to a charitable account I've contributed to for years, a food bank in Tucson that Patricia and I used to volunteer at occasionally when we were younger. I wrote Owen a letter, not a text, a letter on paper, the way people used to communicate when they wanted something to last. I told him that I loved him. I told him that I had loved him since before he was born, and that nothing would ever change that. I told him about his grandmother's quilt, because I wanted him to know I had seen it, and I had felt it. And I had decided not to say anything at the time, because I was still hoping things were different than they were. I told him about the hallway at Thanksgiving, and what I'd heard his mother-in-law say. I told him that I had spent the last several years adjusting myself to a set of expectations that I had never agreed to, and that I was done adjusting. I told him that I was not disappearing. I was not punishing him. I was not angry in the sharp, burning way. I was sad, the kind of sad that comes from finally seeing something clearly that you'd been squinting at for a long time. I told him that whenever he wanted to have a real conversation, not about money, not about logistics, not about what I could provide, I would be here. I would always be here. I mailed the letter on a Friday, and then I drove up to the White Mountains alone. I rented the same cabin I'd rented for the fishing trip Owen had canceled. I spent 4 days up there, mostly fishing alone, reading in the evenings, sitting on the porch watching the sun come down behind the trees. The air up there smells like pine and cold water, and something I can't name exactly. Something that makes you feel like the world is larger and quieter than your problems. I thought about Patricia constantly. I talked to her a little, the way you do when nobody is watching. I told her what I'd done, and I asked her if I'd done it right. I didn't get an answer, obviously, but I felt settled in a way I hadn't felt in years, like I had finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to carry. I got home on a Tuesday. Owen had called 3 times, Brianna had called once. There was a voicemail from Owen that I listened to while I was unloading my truck. His voice was strange, tight in the throat in a way that meant he'd been crying, or was about to. "Dad, I got your letter. I need to talk to you. Can you call me back?" I stood in my driveway for a minute, holding my phone. Then I carried my gear inside, made coffee, and sat down at my kitchen table. I called him back the next morning. He answered on the second ring. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Owen said, "I didn't know about the quilt, Dad. I want you to know that. I didn't know." "No," I said. "I've been thinking about everything you said in the letter." He paused. "I think I knew things were off. I just kept telling myself it was fine." "I know that too," I said. "I did the same thing." What followed was the longest, most honest conversation I'd had with my son in years, maybe ever. He talked about things I hadn't expected him to name, the pressure he felt to provide a certain kind of life for Brianna, the way her family's expectations had become his expectations, without him fully noticing, the guilt he'd carried ever since Patricia died and never knew what to do with. I listened. I didn't fill every silence. I let him find his way through it. At one point he said, "I think I let you become a resource instead of a father, and I don't know how to tell you how sorry I am for that." I was quiet for a moment. "You just did," I said. "That was 8 months ago. Things are not fixed. I want to be honest about that, because I think people tell stories like this, and they want a clean ending, a redemption arc with a bow on it. Life is messier than that." Owen and I are still rebuilding. There are awkward dinners and conversations that start strong and trail off. Brianna and I are polite to each other in the careful way of people who have put something fragile between them on the table and are both trying not to knock it over. But last month, Owen drove out to see me on a Saturday. Just him. No Brianna, no agenda. He showed up at my door at 9 in the morning with 2 coffees from the place in town he knows I like. We sat on my porch for 3 hours. We talked about his mother. We talked about the Salt River and the summer he was 14 and caught a brown trout that was almost as long as his arm. We talked about what he wants his life to look like in 10 years. Before he left, he asked me if I still had the fishing gear. I told him it was in the garage where it always was. He said, maybe we should actually do that trip. I said, the cabin's available in April. He said, I'll check my schedule. And I know in the way that you know things after 60 years of learning how people work, that he might check his schedule and find a reason it doesn't work out. That's possible. But I also know that he came to my door on a Saturday morning with coffee. He came because he wanted to, not because he needed something. And that is worth more to me than any amount of money I have ever written a check for. Patricia always said, the hardest part of loving your children is learning that you can't hold on to them. You raise them to leave, she used to say. And then you spend the rest of your life figuring out how to let them come back. I've spent a long time getting this wrong. I think I'm finally getting it right.